the book of Revelation. We're on chapter 8. We're not going to do any review, except for about a half hour. No. There'll be some things that you will hear from last week, just little anecdotes, of course, because they're probably more important points to remember. But we're going to start again by reading, if you would, Adam, verses 1 through 5.
Well, here we go. Now, when the final opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. Then I saw the angels who stand before God, and 7 trumpets were given to them. Another angel came and stood at the altar, holding the incense burner. He was given much incense to offer, along with all the sheep of the cities. Upon the golden altar was one throne. And spoke the incense with the prayers of the creation, rose before God to the angel's hand. Then the angel took the incense burner and threw it in the fire to the altar, and threw it to the earth. And there were flashes of thunder and rumblings, and flashes of lightning.
And then from here on in the chapter, we have like machine guns of judgment. They're called trumpets. And angels up in heaven are blowing these trumpets, and certain things are occurring on the earth, and they're not good. They're disasters. We'll learn about them. Maybe today we might get to some trumpets. I think it's imperative to realize that this little bit of text, along with other bits of text that overlay this, are describing in the temple the Friday morning and evening service. And it's totally key, because what comes after Friday? Shabbat. And if you subscribe to the idea that I don't know if we'll get to it today, we'll see, that this is not just any old Shabbat. This is a really important Shabbat, because it's the Shabbat that precedes Shavuot. Now, what's Shavuot? It occurs the beginning of June. Usually it's the 4th feast celebrated, and you count it from what feast? First fruits, which is after Passover and unleavened bread. So you have 3 spring feasts, right? Passover, unleavened bread, first fruits, and then you count from first fruits to Shavuot. It's known as, in the Christian world, Pentecost, right? Which is a fancy Greek word that means 50. 50 days after first fruits, you have this next feast. We believe that this is the Friday preceding the Shabbat that's preceding Shavuot. We'll see if we get to the evidence to support that today. So, in a typical Friday service, which is a typical, a Friday service is very typically done every day of the week. Okay, there's a few little changes right at the end of the day on Friday, but by and large, everything that comes or that happens on Friday happens on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. It's the morning and the evening service, right? And at 9 o'clock, they would typically have the AM service. And we talked about this last week. This is when Yeshua was hung on the cross. And then they start sacrificing all the Passover lambs. He was hung on the cross on Passover. And then at 3 o'clock, the PM service would start. And that's when he passed away, which is when the last lamb in the temple was simultaneously being sacrificed. So you've got an AM service and a PM service. And we learned that there's 24 courses of priests. The Kohanim were cut up because there's too many of them to all serve at the temple. So they cut them up into 12 groups. And each group would serve twice a year, except on the 3 hogs, the three primary festivals, Passover, Shavuot, the one we're thinking this is talking about, and the last one, Sukkot. So the first, the fourth, and the seventh, all the priests are present at the temple. And here, how many priests do we have? We have 24 groups that are elders, they're called. 24, so we know it's a feast. We know it's one of the three. We just don't know yet which one it is. These are, if you haven't picked up from Adams and mine's teaching over the years, the feasts are basically, they're lots of things, but they're basically prophetic. They're harbingers of things to come and the order of things to come. Big events. You pick a big event in Yeshua's life, guess what? It occurred on any old random day in the year. No, it always occurs on a feast day. We won't get into all of that, but everything from his birth to his death and things in between, and even his resurrection, all occur. The coming of the Spirit of God, they all occur on feasts. So guess what? At the end of time, what's going to happen? Likely, he's going to come back for his bride on his feast. He's going to come back with his bride on a feast, and he's going to bring judgment on a feast, and he's going to marry his bride on a random day. No, he's going to marry his bride on a feast.
As we've said in our books and our teachings, the feasts are God's calendar. It's God's timeline. And so once we realized that many years ago, we started looking at Revelation from that perspective. And suddenly, things started popping out. And, oh, that's terminology for that kind of feast. That's terminology for that kind of feast. And so you cannot divorce the book of Revelation from its Hebrew roots. You can't. Every time we John and I would always talk about this. So we start studying something in red, and we always ended up immediately back in the Torah and having to study all sorts of things in the Torah to learn more depth and insight on how to understand the Revelation. It is impossible. You can get some basic general insight, right? And if God shows something or reveals something, yes. But if you take it away from its Hebrew roots and the feasts and all the temple services, you miss huge swaths of understanding.
The perfect example, Adam, is in the 60s, somebody wrote a book, very important Christian guy, on the book of Revelation. And remember, we're going to get there very quickly. The fifth trumpet sounds, and what happens? These locusts rise up out of the pit, and they do all kinds of exploits. We'll get into that soon. Not today, but soon in the future. Well, per his interpretation, they were helicopters.
Because he surmised and they assumed that, John is trying to describe a vision that he's thinking about our time, right? In our day and age, and that he wouldn't understand how to describe it, so he described helicopters as a type of focus.
Let me tell you, the last thing they are is helicopters. They are something. They're easy. They're easy to identify once you're armed with the Old Testament, because locusts in the Old Testament are something very specific, and there's been locusts locked up in the pit from ancient times. Well, now they're being released, so duh, it's obviously these guys that were locked up there. They're the only guys that are ever locked up in the pit. Now they're getting released, but we'll get into that. So,
Caleb, would you bring up the national please?
During the prep for the end of the PM service, so everyone knows what I'm talking about now, right? They would, after the PM service was done, they would send some Kohanim to the bronze altar. Oh, sorry. The bronze altar, which was in the outer court. It's that thing on the left, that square thing, looks like an H. Bronze altar. They would go, and all week long, they've been slaughtering lambs and other sacrifices that the people have brought, sometimes Thanksgiving offerings. Remember, there's 6 of them that the people could offer. And the thing got a little bloody. So a couple of Kohanim were assigned to clean that off, and they would put that, the dried blood, etc., that they would wash off, and they would put it aside. Also, a couple of Kohanim that were picked out would also go in, and in the inner court, the altar of incense there, every day that would be cleansed, because twice a day it got filled up with coals from the bronze altar, so they had something to burn the incense on, right, in the inner court. So they would bring coals preceding the AM and the PM service into the inner court, put them on the altar of incense, and then the incensing priest would go in, put the incense on it, smoke would go up. We talked all about this last week, right? And the smoke of the incense represents prayers of the saints. So every time you pray, it's like sending incense smoke signals to God. And we talked about make it count, right? So they would scrape and cleanse the golden altar, the incense altar, as well as the bronze altar. So you had this commingling of leftover blood and coals and ash all put together. Where would they do that? Or where would they take that? Outside the camp in the wilderness and outside the walls of Jerusalem once they had the temple up. And they would throw it on the ground. What's the imagery here?
What we just read in the book of Revelation, see, what you see over and over is John will see what's going on in heaven, and then you'll see the results that happen on earth. Right? You keep seeing 2 places. It's like John had said before. It's like a disorder. Right? Your disorder shows you the inside, right? What's happening behind the scenes, and then what's happening in front of you. Right? And it's the same thing here in the book of Revelation. And so, what do you need? This is heaven. And angels are doing the incense offering in heaven. Right? Bring before God. And then it says they take coals and fire, the ashes, and blood, and they throw them down the earth.
Which is exactly what Revelation 8 here says. It's mud mixed with, mud, ash, blood, thrown down on the earth. Okay? So he's giving, if you know how the temple service operated, you're going, oh, well, geez. It's not just a Sunday through Thursday service because there's blood. They would only clean the bronze altar on Friday. So on Friday evening after the PM service, it was coals, ash, and blood mixed together thrown down on the earth. So God is giving you little hints that, oh, this is a Friday service.
You know what they would do on the break the other days of the week? They would just, and in the morning, the priest that was chosen would take the little silver shovel, and then they just do a ceremonial cleaning. They take from the main ashes in the center, just take one scoop, take it down, and put it on the bottom by the side of the altar as a ceremonial cleaning, but not the big cleaning you're talking.
Right. God is giving, all throughout the revelational text, you'll go, hey, wonder why that's in there. You know, like there's a story in chapter 16 in the book of Revelation about somebody being found naked at the temple. And if you know what that is referring to a judgment that was put on a Levite for falling asleep on guard duty at the temple. And we'll get more into that weeks from now because it's in chapter 16. But John is inserting by the Spirit of God little pieces, little mark. It's kind of like if you're leaving, if you want to get your way back out in the woods you tie little ribbons on tree limbs so you can find your way back. That's what John's doing. That's what God's doing. He's giving you little breadcrumbs so you can find your way back or know where you are in the temple service. Let me tell you, it's all coming to a head here in this service. So let's talk a little bit about what coals being thrown onto the earth. Does that ever occur in the Old Testament? Yeah. It's in Ezekiel 10. It says, starting in verse 1, "Then I looked, and behold, in the expanse that was over the head of the cherubim, something like sapphire stones in appearance, resembling a throne, appeared above them." So this is obviously, if I would substantiate it more by reading the previous chapter, this is the throne of God. And he spoke, that's the big guy, the creator, and he spoke to the man clothed in linen and said, "Enter between the whirling wheels under the cherubim and fill your hands with coals of fire from between the cherubim and scatter them over the city." And he entered. We'll stop reading there because it goes on. So let me tell you what the setup here is. This prophecy, really starting from chapter 1 in Ezekiel, is a mirror image of the book of Revelation. And it takes 10 chapters to get to the same point we are in the book of Revelation here in chapter 8. Okay? These coals that are being thrown on Jerusalem are the same coals that are being thrown onto the world. Now, understand, when you read Old Testament prophecy, they're usually Israelite-centric. So we're not talking about Russia. We're not talking about the United States of America, because most of those are focused on God's people. I'm going to judge you, but it doesn't mean if you do the same thing, I'm not going to mess with you. It just means this is what, as an example to the world, this is what I'm going to do to the world, but I'm going to show the world what's coming by using the Israelites as an example. So what is he, this, thank you. So if we would read chapter 9, which is hugely important, and we've alluded to them when we talked about the 144,000 being marked, and we said that there was 4 places in the scripture that refer to the 144,000. We went through those texts a little bit. One of them was Ezekiel 9, the previous chapter. And here we see, just like in 7, what happens. They're marked. Remember, the angel says, "Don't hurt the earth until I mark," what's the verbiage that it uses? Thank you, the servants of God. And he marks them with a tav, okay? And who are they? 12,000 from each tribe, right? And we talked about that. We won't belabor that point. So in chapter 9, we see this same phenomena occurring. We see God saying, "Don't hurt anybody because judgment's about to fall until I mark." And he gives this angel the responsibility to put a tav, a mark, an oat on everybody that moans and groans for the wickedness of the city. I think some language like that. Yeah, they're really sad because they see the wickedness in their midst. And so he says, mark those people out because they're not going to get this judgment. I'm going to. Maybe I need to start moaning and groaning more. I don't know. So anyway, that leads up to 10, right? And now what we see is these, just like in the book of Revelation, 7, where they're marked, is followed by the coals being thrown down on the earth in chapter 8 in Revelation. Here we see the same progression. This metaphor of coals being thrown down on the earth In fact, when you see that, and there's multiple places where coals are being, it doesn't say always that they're from the altar, but that's the illusion. Because what happens in the Bible many times is God will set a standard. It's kind of like the word yom, okay? In Genesis, on the first yom, he did X. On the second, he sets a standard of what that word means. So the standard is, when you see the word yom, it means 3 billion years. No, it means a literal day. And he does the same thing, and God will allude to it by just using a word or two. Burning coals. He did the same thing to a very famous city in the Old Testament. Oh man, you guys are on it. Sodom and Gomorrah, right? And this is imagery of judgment. Every time you see coals being thrown onto the earth, whether it's on Sodom, Jerusalem, or in revelational context, it's always the world. It's always God is up to here with mankind, and he's going to bring judgment because of his disobedience. The old
you don't recall, Sodom and Gomorrah, fire mixed with blood.
Yeah. It's just accidental. No, it's God is setting pro forma. He's setting language up, phrases up that you need to carry forward to the next appearance of that same phrase, and all the accompanying information that comes with it. It's not just coals, random coals. These are coals of judgment coming from the altar in heaven, right?
You have a question for the brimstone is burning coals? Yeah. In that case, absolutely.
You'd have to look in the Hebrew words, because sometimes brimstone is not an allusion to this. So you'd have to do a little research. So we see this burning coals being thrown onto the earth in Zephaniah 1:18, 3:8, Deuteronomy 32:22, which is in describing God's judgments or curses. In Psalms 11:6, it says, he will rain coals of fire upon the wicked. And brimstone, here, it's apropos, and brimstone and burning will be the portion of their cup. Now, if how many of us want to get in on some of this action? You know, somebody does you wrong. If God can do it, I might be able to one-up it, right? Here's how we throw fire and burning brimstone on. It says, Proverbs 25:21 and 22. If your enemy is hungry, steal any food he has remaining. No, it says, give him food to eat, and if he is thirsty, give him water to drink, for you will heap burning coals on his head, and the Lord will reward you. So why do you think God sets it up that way? Because by you throwing burning coals of bread and water on people, some of them will see the light and repent. But those that don't, we all have the dangerous thing of choice. If you don't, then what? God goes, okay, that's my job. I'm the one that separates the sheep from the goats, and I determine this by their actions.
But so by saying that, it's obvious that burning coals is a symbol of judgment.
Absolutely.
So God is saying, when an enemy does you wrong, you show God his kindness. And by doing that, God will judge them and not you.
So the end of the service occurs. We'll get to more detail as we proceed in Revelation, because it's described more completely. But recall that at the end of the incense service, there's silence in heaven for a half hour, reminiscent of Revelation here, and that's the time when the incense going up, and in the outer court, all the people and the Levites are out there praying to God, And the imagery is obvious. And then at the end, the high priest is joined by the Kohanim that did the incense service and a few others, and they stand on the high step of the temple and they read the Aaronic blessing, and we'll get to that down the road.
No, another question. Any question? We can't do comments, and I can't pass around.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
right. Right, and
Yeah.
what she's saying for the screen there is that how important it is to do what the proverb to say what Yeshua talks about being godly. It's doing spiritual warfare when you do that. And that's what's important.
Personally,
That's how you can gain victory.
Personally, I stay away from prayers like, God, get him. No, God, get him, as in save him, bless him, in spite of the fact I hate his guts and what he's doing to me, or the nation, or the world. You still died on the cross for him. Somehow get him in a positive sense. Save him. Bring conviction into his life. Get a repentant spirit. That's how you want to pour judgment on his head. I leave all retribution to God. It does us no, because, if you start praying like that, it starts rotting something inside. Doesn't it? Anyway.
Several hands. All right, yes.
Oh Lord, change hearts and minds.
Oh Lord, change hearts and minds.
Yeah.
Say the prayer. Yeah, start with mind. Exactly.
Prayers we understand you got, whether
What holds with that?
Yeah, that's what we're going through these verses. We've got it.
Well, it's brimstone, fire, and brimstone, right? What did this read in the book of Revelation? What does God do to the wicked? Throw out
Yeah.
coals and brimstone, and like it's this idea of that's something that comes from heaven. That's something that our revolution goes to God. And what is God doing? He's like, you know what? I have fire available for a special spot in Scripture and drama. No, the imagery is right here in the book of Revelation. He's in angels. We brought coals from the golden altar. Throw that on the. I didn't understand what you said.
Well, and Revelation, and to bring it more fully, Revelation gets it from Ezekiel 10:2, Zephaniah. I got a whole list of verses that substantiate this fire and brimstone being poured out from God to earth is imagery of how he brings judgment. We're going to learn as we proceed is that God is really into purity. And purity can come one of two ways. You only want to be purified one of the ways. That way is through humility and faith and love and a reflection of this kindness that God is. God says for you to be pure, you treat your enemies like this. Okay? That's how you become holy. The word holy in Hebrew means pure, clean, cleansed. Okay? So you can be cleansed by your own choice, or you can be cleansed by God's choice. And God's choice to cleanse, when he's throwing coals down on the earth, it's like one of the last resorts. It's judgment. When you look at these examples of fire and brimstone and blood, hot coals being poured down on the earth. It's the end of these people. God is giving them so many. Sodom and Gomorrah had hundreds of chances to come. He even sent them Abraham and Lot. And what ended up happening? Instead of Lot rubbing off on them, they rubbed off on Lot. And Lot was barely able to make it out. But the point is that God, after multiple attempts, he realizes, okay, I'm a gentleman. I'm going to give you your choice and the consequences thereof. You're putting water in the gas tank. We talked about that the week. Doesn't work. I wish it would, because water's a whole lot cheaper, but nonetheless, there's judgment, there's penalty for violating God's ways of living and thinking. So you can be cleansed by humility and good choices, holy choices yourself, or you can be cleansed at the hand of God. And it's kind of like in Thessalonians, it says, you've been so against me, I'm going to give you over to a reprobate mind, which means, okay, it's like Pharaoh hardened his heart, right? Well, what happened to Pharaoh? Nothing good. And it's the same way with this kind of judgment. It brings the end upon the recipient. But what happens? In fact, we're going to see this in the bowls, and we'll talk more about this. But when God comes back, is he coming back to a place that's filled with unholiness? No. His home is going to be, and we'll see that in the bowls later on.
One thing you should know, anytime God does bring judgment on people, if you said church away and historically, those people are beyond redemption. They've gone so far that they're so barbaric, they're so evil, they're so insane that it's obvious there's no chance for redemption. There's no way back. Okay? Is there a question? Is there a sense that Cassie Moses is coming from the alternative sense of that?
Well, I think you're correct, because what do we see in chapter 6? The fifth seal, we see there's people that have died that are, it says, under the bronze altar, okay, in heaven. And what are they praying? When are you going to come back? When? Because they know they're going to receive their immortal bodies. Plus, they also ask God, when are you going to clean the place?
When is there going to be justice for what's been done to us?
Yeah, because they've been martyred, okay? So it's certainly apropos, and I think it's a logical conclusion that God is going, okay, you guys, I'm going to honor your.
He does tell them to wait until their numbers fulfill.
Yeah, which doesn't sound like a lot of fun for the rest of us, but nonetheless, because back in the seal days, which we're closely encroaching on, that's just the beginning of birth pains, Matthew 24, right? But like Matthew says, that's just the beginning of the birth. The birth is representative of the second coming, right? We got a ways to go here. So, okay, the priest gives the Aaronic blessing, and that's the end of the service, except there's a couple additional things that happen on Friday between the end of the service and the beginning of the Shabbat, which occurs when sundown on Friday evening, right? So they allow, this is done every day of the week. The priests allow additional people that have brought sin offerings to come and have those sacrificed for their sin, but it also includes Thanksgiving offerings or any of the other 4 types of, there's one that wouldn't happen, but there's 5 that could occur in this afterglow if you will, after the PM service that the people could bring. That's why you'll see verses like, don't let the sun go down on your sin. What's the actual word? Anger, thank you, which is usually sin because our anger is always holy. No, it's not. Don't let the sun go down on your anger. Well, that's an allusion to the daily temple service.
In other words, get yourself to the temple and make a sacrifice.
Right.
Be close to God.
How many have been mad at your spouse? You guys never, of course, but how many people know somebody that's been mad and you're laying next to them and you've got kind of a little tit-tat kind of thing, you're mad at them and you don't talk through it before you fall asleep. And you wake up the next morning happy that you've got a spouse and you love them and adore them. No, it's probably festered, hasn't it? Nothing good happens by allowing those kinds of things in your life to just sit there. Usually they rot and become worse. In fact, usually it's like, in addition, I've not mentioned this before. Anyway, you see these allusions to just the temple service all throughout. Yeah, totally. So you've got the last sin sacrifices, the last sacrifices, even Thanksgiving sacrifices are done on the bronze altar after the PM service. You've got the leftover coals and the blood and the ashes from both of these altars scraped off, cleansed, and in this case, thrown onto the earth. And one other thing that's had me befuddled for a while is the showbread is presented on the table of showbread. Right there, you can see it, table of showbread. You got 12 loaves there, those with gold. Yeah, inside the inner court. So there's a ceremony that occurs during this time period. And this service actually occurs immediately upon sundown. So it happens on Shabbat. Okay? They wait until boom, the sun's down, and then they do this. It's the first thing they do on Saturday, which is Sunday evening at sundown, right? Is this ceremony where some priests, we can get into the detail, we won't do it, but they basically change out the old bread, and they distribute the old bread amongst the Kohanim, and they slip in brand new bread. So I'm going, okay, where's this ceremony? So I'm like looking from, of course, 8 is the end of the PM service, so it's got to be sometime after that in Revelation. So I'm looking, I'll go, nothing is pinging here. And then it dawned, I was reading something, and it said, it told me when the bread is baked and is put in the temple. Well, before the PM service, so sometime around noon, there was a special group of Kohanim. It was a family, actually, that was in charge of mixing all this pure. It had like 11 sieves that they would filter the flour to make this so it's pure, perfect bread. And they would bake this bread, and they would then bring it into the, let's call it the lobby of, in the temple, there's a lobby to the inner court, okay? And they would slip it on this marble table, and it would sit there all throughout the PM service waiting for the ceremony. So when the ceremony came, nobody was going, where did we put it? Or what? We forgot to make it? No, it was already there beforehand waiting for the service. So I'm going, oh my gosh. This is my own opinion, but to me, I think it makes a lot of sense. You know, these 12 tribes, these 12 groups of 12,000 in chapter 7, which precede 8, the 144,000, they're metaphorical representations of the showbread. something that was interesting to me is what happened to the 144,000? The angel comes down, they're going to judge the poor wind, they're standing on four corners of the earth, and they said, no, don't hurt the earth until we mark the 144,000 on the forehead, right? And what did they mark them with? A tav, a cross, right? So I was reading about how they baked these things. And what they would do is they would bake them, and then they would take their finger and they would dip it in oil and make a tav on the bread. And I'm going, oh, wait a minute here. Are these guys imagery of the groomsmen? So, oops. This, if you look in the Old Testament, in the Old Testament, it usually gets interpreted showbread, table of showbread. But I don't know why they're doing showbread. There's no show. And it doesn't mean showbread. It just means bread. So why are they designating these things as special loaves? It's just the typical word for bread here. But then I discovered a few of the places they were called bread of the presence. I go, okay, that's a little more meaningful. Bread of the presence. What's the actual Hebrew word there for bread of the presence? And it's lechem ha panim. It's not, well, it can mean presence, but it's bread of the face and it's panim. Yes, the word is only in the form of plural, but it's bread of, the literal interpretation would be bread of the faces. And I'm going, okay, is this a hint here? I mean, obviously, what presence do you want? The groomsman or the creator? You want the creator, right? So the priests throughout the ages, this bread, this showbread, became the bread of the presence because it represented the creator, right? It's on which side of the temple was the table on? That happens to be the north. This thing should be flipped the other way around because that direction is east, right? So north is that way here in our congregation. That would put this table on the north. Well, the priests recognized that the most holy portion of the temple is on the north side because that's the closest you can be to God because God dwells in the north. We've talked about this a little. I've never developed the concept in the Bible very much, but you can substantiate that God dwells to the north, right? We've talked about, I won't even get into that, but this idea on the north side represents God. And so bread of the presence became the transliteration in English. But I'm sitting there going, yeah, faces though. And I'm thinking, now I'm probably prejudiced because I've already got the idea of who these guys are. But I'm going, it could be bread of the likeness. And who has God's likeness? Who has his face? Because we're created in his image, right? We're made after what he looks like. So we look like him. The more we sin, the less we look like him. But the more we're pure and holy, the more we look like him. What does Ezekiel 10:2 call these guys? They're righteous. They're the ones that have stood strong against all the perversion that has come over Jerusalem. These guys are specially marked out for a job in Revelation 7. And in chapter 14, we're going to see what the job is. It is a job of honor. We'll get there. They're obviously the groomsmen. So I'm going, what better group to be if you're sitting on the throne? These guys are to your left, the most closest to God's presence. And then I'm going, the marriage ceremony. We have the groomsmen on the left and the bride on the right, right? Where does that come from? It comes from ancient Hebraic ceremonial foundations. Is that an image here? God has, if they are the groomsmen, he has them on the left in metaphorical terms. Who's on the right? The menorah. Yeah, the menorah represents many things, but what's one thing it represents? There's 6 branches connected to the shamash. There's 6. 6 is the symbol of man. So is the bride to his right here in the organization of the temple? Just speculation on my part, but to me it looks like God is arranging the book of Revelation around a wedding. And the groomsmen, that we know, and these groomsmen have taken their place in the book of Revelation in chapter 7, and they've been marked out just like the showbread is marked with a tav. I'm going to skip this stuff. So, just as a reminder, one of the things that occurs just before the Saturday service of showbread starts is these people have one last chance. And this is a big Friday. This is, in the context of metaphorical, this is the end of the age. They have one last chance to bring in their sacrifices for God to repent. Now, we don't have. Yes.
All throughout the book of Revelation, after every, you have 7 judgments going on in each and every section. What does it always say? And they still will not repent.
And it's so profound because of what you just read in the previous verses. You'd think, get a clue, humble yourself. This is the end. There's a passage, I think it's in Ezekiel, says, I will make man rare upon the earth. I'm going, okay, yeah, rare is kind of rare. It's like you might start getting a clue.
We're not rare right now.
No. So, one last chance to be forgiven. Don't let the sun go down on your sin, Ephesians 4:26. So this Friday, not this next Friday, but the Friday of this description in Revelation is getting ready for the Shabbat, which is the beginning of, it's actually the end of an age when God is coming back for his bride and the start of a new age. What age would that be? We know it as the 1,000-year reign, right? There's a transference of ages here. There's another interesting thing that occurs on Shabbat. In fact, it occurs just right at the end of Friday. There's a changing of the Kohanim courses. So, and they do it in various, they trade, the old course trades out certain elements of the service and allows the new course to come in. And right, each course. And it occurred to me, I go, we've got the same thing going on here. We've got these 24 elders who are acting as the Kohanim courses, and they're being ushered in. Who's doing the service now? Because the earthly service was just imagery. It was a copy of what was going on in heaven, right? Not the other way around. So who's doing the service up in heaven right now? Last week I alluded to this. Every time I see somebody serving in the priestly service in heaven, it's always an angel. There could be people that have their souls up there doing something, I don't know, but it doesn't mention it. It's always angels that are performing all of these priestly duties. But it's interesting that there's a change out on this grand Saturday. It's several places in the book of Revelation. I have these. It says that, I can't find the references, but it refers to mankind, believers, people that believe in God, that we will be priests and rule and reign in the court of God once this all is done. Of course. So we see this change out. Right now it's angels. We're going to, once these events start playing out, God is switching the course. He's replacing the angels, taking that service from them and replacing them with mankind, those that are his bride. Yeah. So, yeah. Let's do the first trumpet. Yeah. Now keep in mind that these trumpets are calls. They're not just some random, like you turn on the radio, yeah, we got some noise here. These are calls to do something. And so why don't you read, we'll probably have enough time to do one maybe. Yeah.
So after first off, once the fire and the coals and blood and stuff are thrown out there, and after the thunder, rumbles, blasts, lightning, and earthquakes, and we've already read in the previous chapters that earthquakes going on, a big one that shakes everything. And then more earthquakes, so obviously the earth is not too bad. Right? Then it says in verse 6, then the seven angels holding the seven trumpets prepared to sound the first trumpeted, and there was hail and fire mixed with blood, and they were thrown upon the earth. That's just very what we just read. A third of the earth burned up, a third of the trees burned up, and all the green grass burned up. Does that sound catastrophic? But anything in our, these the time on the earth, have you ever seen something that would be that much strange? Okay. That's catastrophic. I remember when they were studying this and writing the book, that I go, okay, hold on. If you get rid of all green grass and a third of all the trees on the earth, what's that going to do to the earth's atmosphere? What's it going to do to the atmosphere? What's it going to do to the Earth's ecology? What's going to happen?
It's not good. The most of the O2 is made by plankton in the ocean, but certainly it's buttressed by the green grass and the trees. We've got literally millions and millions of square acres of forest all over the earth, of which a lot right now is on fire. How many of you are aware of the Canadian Arctic fires? And it's causing, in the east especially, smoke deluging in on New York City and all over Canada. And it's literally hundreds and hundreds of thousands of acres, and they're all over northern Canada, just burning the forest down. I'm not saying that that is a fulfillment of this, but one thing that we've learned as we've marched closer to Revelation in a time sequence is these things don't happen, boom, like that. They start to phase in. You know, it's kind of like birth pains. You know, all of a sudden you start seeing some signs. And then it starts getting more and more serious as you get close to the end. But these things phase in. So I would anticipate, just like we are expecting wars and rumors of wars, Matthew chapter 24, we're going to see increased levels of war. And of course, that's what we're seeing. I think they're going to culminate in something far worse than what we're seeing now. I think we're seeing economic problems. Again, the seals, I think they're going to get worse than what they are now. Deception, all out of the seals. We see that everywhere. I think it's going to continue to get worse than they are right now.
So, you read about all the conflict that's going on with leaders, nations, our country, other countries, individual families. It's warfare.
Yeah.
They're fighting amongst each other. What happens when leaders of nations start getting brawls with each other? It doesn't stay between people or those individuals. It goes, okay, my country is out of attack here, right? We're in war many times. So, how should we be praying? Is this a sign that we're maybe entering into the second seal? We should pay attention, right? Because fights among leaders turn into wars amongst countries. So,
Yeah, and I think all of these things are giving us insight into what's going to increase. These judgments are going to continue to increase and increase until they're fulfilled. And then the next judgment we've already seen start to occur, but it'll crescendo soon after. And then the next one, it's not like they boom, and then it's over, and then boom, and then that's over. They have overlapping event horizons, time horizons.
how we described it before. So, try to picture our mind. Okay? Here's the beginning of Revelation. Here's the end of Revelation. Right? In this slide, the first seal starts. That's deception, as we talked about that day, right? That deception starts going. Then the second seal starts. Deception doesn't stop, and now the second seal starts taking up its place. No, deception goes all the way to the end. That's one line. Now the second layer, and another line starts up at this point in time, warfare. And that starts going too, and that goes all the way to the end. And then a third layer starts up, right? Pestilence, plague, that starts moving and going, famine. And that goes all the way to the end. And then death, right? Plague and famine and war, right? All that goes all the way to the end. It's the same thing. It's layer upon layer upon layer, and it just increases to the point where, what did John say? Until man becomes rare. There's death on massive scales, by warfare, by plague, by terror, earthquakes, terrible, terrible things. Some of it's man on man, and as we're getting into, obviously the trumpets are God's judgment. God is now bringing his voice.
And this is not some random, God had a bad hair day, so I'm going to judge the earth. This is something that he designed from the beginning, okay? In Leviticus 26, Deuteronomy 28, and some overlap into the other chapters, God talks about blessing and curses. He's directing it at Israel again, but only as an example to what he will bring to the rest of the world. Revelation is focused on the world because it's the end. Everybody's time, everybody's chance to make that last Friday evening sacrifice will come to an end. What we're going to find is that all of these trumpet blasts, the bowls, and for that matter, the seals that we've already talked about, are all fulfilling these judgments that he prophesied back 3,500 years ago. These aren't anything new. His word is good. Good and bad consequences. So,
Okay. Where it says trumpets, I would argue that it's, you would argue it's
no, they're not. These,
Here's why. In the temple service, they had shofars.
yeah, the daily sacrifice. We haven't gotten into this. I should probably say this now. In the morning at sunrise, 6-ish a.m., they would blow a trumpet and a silver trumpet, and they would open the gates of the temple. Then at the a.m. service, to make this simple, they would blow 3 more trumpets, silver trumpets. There was 2 silver trumpets that were specially made for this job. Most of the feasts, most of the appointed times were designated with or demarcated with the blowing of silver trumpets. There were some shofars, but not on the daily sacrifice.
Shofars were used for such.
Yeah. And then, so we have one, what?
Just steward like that's what we're going.
Yeah, of course. Egypt is metaphorically in the Old Testament and in the New is representative of the world. So, now God's people encompasses a whole lot more than just Jewish heritage. Paul makes this perfectly clear that it includes all believers. So, as much as Satan wants to destroy, kill, deceive, deter, prevent you from doing your duty to God, he loses in the end, thank God. Getting there might be hellacious. We see these martyrs, they didn't have a good time. Yeah, they're all beheaded. We'll get more into that down the road. So we have 1 trumpet at the a.m. Opening of the gates, 3 at the a.m. service, which starts usually around 9, and we have 3 more trumpets at the p.m. service. So for a total of 7. We believe that these 7 trumpet blasts are imagery of this Friday temple service. Yeah. So this point is all of these judgments that we see in the book of Revelation are come right out of the Old Testament. They're not brand new judgments befalling the world. So we got a few minutes.
One more question.
Oh,
Yes. It's one of the polls every day. You asked a very same question I did. We have an answer for that. I don't know if we'll get into it today. If you're here next week, or actually not next week, next time you'll be here, I've been studying it. Got me up this morning at 2:30. He said, "Hey, check out the third, like, what does it say, the 4th kill, and then the 3rd kill." And then, yes, there are certain things in the sacrifices where it's on the 4th and on the 3rd. Right? So they correlate with the sacrifices.
so these trumpets, they're in Jerusalem. The trumpet blasts were not warnings, but they were announcements that important things were about to happen. So are they here. Important things are about to happen. When these judgments starts to fall, I wonder and they represent the Trump judgments or the Trump blessings.
Depending where you're sitting.
Exactly. I wonder who's going to be listening. I wonder who will hear. Will we be hearing, or will we just be worrying about the party and the type of beer we're going to drink on Friday at the party?
But you know, there are different calls that you go on.
There is.
You have the technologists, which is called to worship. There's the chivalry, which is called repentance. There's the Torah, which is the call to war. And then there's the great trumpet, so.
So, these blasts are kind of echoed in Psalms 139. And I was going to read the whole chapter, we're out of time. But they have imagery in this chapter of these feasts that are about to befall. But the point is are we being attentive? Are we hearing? And then are we doing anything about God's talking? He's blowing the trumpet every day in our life. And are we listening, or are we just busy about our affairs? There's nothing wrong about being busy with our affairs because we have responsibility. But do we do them unto God? And do we take time out? The fact that you're all here this morning says at least partially yes. This Psalms 139 is kind of interesting. It's kind of the context is one of judgment. And it starts, it starts on obviously verse 1, but 11 says, surely the darkness will overwhelm me and the light around me will be night. That's what's coming upon the earth is this darkness. And when you see darkness in the Bible, what is it alluding to? You can't see. You can't tell the truth. So while it's day, what do you want to do? Have a party? No, you want to get things right. You want prepare, right? While we have a chance before the flood comes.
This makes me think of the 10 bridesmaids.
Yeah.
Right? The 10
Yeah, yep.
5 are unprepared, 5 are prepared. The ones that got to go to the wedding, the ones that yeah. John, I like the rest of this verse. Okay? It says, even though your hand will be in right hand will they hold me. If I say, surely darkness comes to me, that keeps light at a distance from me. Even, and the different one says, even darkness is not dark. And night is as bright as day. Darkness and light are light. In other words, he's not wrong that way.
In Sheol, at night, at the scariest moment in your life, God's with you. We have to get good enough to see the light in spite of the darkness, right? Because he's always there. 17, it says, how precious also are your thoughts for me, for you, God. How vast is the sum of them? I'm going, how do you posture your relationship with God? God never plays me. I'm on the football team, but I sit next to the ice chest a lot. Is that how you think about your relationship with God? You're wrong. What does it say? It says how precious his thoughts are of you. Yeah, that's awesome, isn't it? How many still aren't convinced? So many times, Adam and I have heard from people, you don't know what I've done. God isn't going to allow me to do anything because of what I've done. I'm going, yeah, we've got a much bigger God than the mind of man can conceive when it comes for repentance. If you have the right heart, if you posture yourself in humility to God, What does it say? How precious are his thoughts about you.
Yes. Oh, yeah, the levels of covenant are all. Okay, you see all of it. Servant, friendship, inheritance, and then marriage. Marriage is in the whole.
It's not accidental. Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
It's all.
And then this is a question we all should be asking ourselves, not the guy sitting next to you. It says, search me, God, and know my heart mind. Put me to the test. Oh, shoot, a test? And know my anxious thoughts. So know my thoughts that are maybe a little aberrant. How many of you are willing to let God, with a spyglass, take a look at your mind heart? Is that a scary thought? Well, how do you clean that up so it's not quite so scary? First off, you allow the inspection. This is a Psalms. David is saying, search me, God. Is that our heart? Are we willing to have the teacher review our paper, our test, and go, yeah, these are mostly wrong? Yes. So, point being, how many of us, to use Adam's word, which is perfect, how many of us are making ourselves vulnerable to God? How many of us are making ourselves vulnerable to our spouse? Or how many of us are making ourselves vulnerable to our friends? Does that improve relationship or deter it? No. When somebody is, well, always, almost always. And then lastly, keep this, as we march through the book of Revelation, this verse jumped out at me. It says, it's verse 5. So it's, you have encircled me behind and in front and placed your hand upon me. As we go through our lives, sometimes how many have learned it's not all fun? As mankind lives through the book of Revelation, it's not going to all be fun. It's going to be, some people right now in the world, they would describe it as horrific. The people in Ukraine would probably describe it as horrific. But wherever your course leads you, know this. God has encircled you, behind you, and in front of you, so nothing can get in, right, except what you allow. And placed his hand upon you. How many would like to have God's hand on you? What does that mean, God's hand on you? What? Blessing, right? What else would it mean? Yeah, protection. Ooh, I like that. What else? Intimacy. Yeah, I mean, you don't put hands on people you don't know, right? What else does it mean? Ooh, I like that too. That's good. Authority. Because God anoints with his hand. Righteousness, not holiness, that's your job, but righteousness. Yeah. We're going to see that hand coming up here in the book of Revelation. That's what God always gives us hope. In spite of the darkness that may shroud our vision and prevent us from seeing him sometimes, he's saying, look, I've got you covered. I've even got my hand on you so you won't fall, you won't trip. I'm protecting you. You just have to listen, like Noah, like Joseph, and multiple other patriarchs in the Old Testament. God said, I've got my hand on you. I'm going to communicate to you all of these things people called out. So it's two-pronged. God has a job to do. He's committed himself to encircling up with protection and putting his hand on us. But you have a job as well. What do you have to do? All of that intimacy that he describes here in verse 5, all is communicating the idea that God is intimate. He is communicating. When he's close, he's talking. Probably he's telling you something to do. He's warning Joseph. He's warning Noah of things that are going to come, maybe small, maybe big in their life. And what did he tell the Old Testament patriarchs? Get ready, prepare. Maybe we need to get rid of this little weakness that we have because Satan knows it and he's going to try to use it for his good. Maybe we need to, everybody's different. These trumpets are blowing. What are we hearing? We need to be attentive. Amen?
Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the you are holy, holy, holy. Father, we just love you now for humility, vulnerability,